Hi, this is Gecho Loopsynth. And this is SoftPop. And I recently took these two on a trip to Chicago to KnobCon because they're both portable and work on AA batteries. And because both of them are quite interesting. In this review, I'll check them out both separately and then play them together a bit. Okay, let's start with SoftPop. It's described by the company as a psychedelic analog synth creature with a wet sound and a rowdy spirit, and indeed, it's a pretty fair description. Now, don't say you haven't been warmed if you're familiar with synths. This one is very different, because psychedelic and rowdy, indeed it is. I mean, its basic elements are what you might find in other semi-modular synths. It's got two oscillators, a filter, a patch bay that lets you rewire it internally and connect it to external gear, a sequencer. SoftPop can either be powered by USB or 4 AA batteries. It also has a speaker, which I guess is good for emergency situations, but the analog oscillators and filter of this synth really sound good, so I don't recommend using the speaker. In terms of controls, you've got 2 sliders for each of the oscillators to control their frequency, all the way from LFO rates to audible rates. This slider controls the filter cutoff frequency, and you've got a little knob here which controls its resonance. And then each of these 3 core frequency controllers has a modulation slider associated with it, and that's where the craziness starts. You see, unlike regular synths, where the oscillators are connected to the filter and then to a VCA and out to the speaker or headphones, this one is routed completely differently by default. The default modulation for VCO0 is a track and hold, like a sample and hold circuit, based on the output of the bandpass filter with holds triggered by VCO1. The default modulation for VCO1 is a mix of the outputs of VCO0 and VCO1 itself. To add to that, this modulation also changes the shape or pulse width of VCO1, which in return impacts the track and hold or sample and hold system, which affects VCO0. And VCO1 also impacts the filter because the varial-shaped triangle wave of VCO1 is the default modulation source for the filter. And the result is, as I mentioned before, quite a bit of craziness. Now, aside from all that, there's this awesome colorful light, which changes color based on the inputs from both VCOs and the filter. If you leave all those connections as they are, the end result could sound quite wet and bubbly. Another goodie thrown in here is the sequencer. Now you can store 2 patterns, but recording them is a bit of a challenge because you're storing slider positions timed to the clock in VCO1. So you're not going to be programming complete songs in here note by note, but rather motion sequencing repetitive and potentially interesting patterns. There's a semitone quantizer here to help with the tonality, and it would be really nice if there was a way to upgrade the firmware here so that this includes quantization into scales and not just semitones. Other controls are the filter resonance, which oddly enough is down here, and I think would have been better served with an onboard knob or slider because I find myself using it quite a bit to shape the sound. Let's take a quick look around the box. You've got fine-tune control for VCO0. This is the resonance knob I was talking about earlier. You've got level controls for the external audio coming in and for the output going out to the speaker or through line out. Audio out, external audio in. 3 jacks for connecting 3.5mm Eurorack cables into the patch bay, USB power and regular power in, and an on-off switch on this side. On the back, it's powered by 4 AA batteries, and this is the secret chamber. Now, if all this wet, drippy craziness isn't for you, you can strip SoftPop of its bubbly mojo by disconnecting the default wirings using this secret compartment in the back. Just slide these dip switches to the left, and SoftPop will step by step become more tame like any other synth, unless of course you want to start messing with it using the patch bay. There's also access to the sequencer chip here, so presumably in the future, additional functionality might be added. Now, while we're on the topic of overall volume, there's one component which isn't here, and that's a VCA, so it's kind of hard to get SoftPop to just give it a rest sometimes, but ultimately there are ways around that limitation by closing the filter or slowing down the VCOs. Aside from disconnecting the predefined wirings of SoftPop through the secret chamber, you also have a fairly comprehensive patch bay here. This is very similar to what you would expect on Eurorack or semi-modular synths, but due to its size, uses little patch cables instead. It takes a bit of getting used to using these small cables, but their compact size allows for each jack to have double the amount of connectors, which is pretty cool and saves you the need for a splitter or a mult. There are some features that you can only access on the patch bay, for example, the envelope follower right here, or the low pass and high pass outputs of the filter. And yeah, because the default routing of the filter is the bandpass filter, which presumably with resonance allows to pick off those bubbly little harmonics. And the envelope follower is a great way to align SoftPop's modulations with an external audio source. No doubt, the patch bay really opens up SoftPop. You can also hook SoftPop into regular Eurorack gear using these 3mm jacks in the back, which can be doubled using a stereo to mono insert type cable. Each of the 3 jacks in the back are represented on top of the patch bay right here, and you can use them either as inputs or as outputs depending on what you connect them to. So example uses would be to synchronize clocks with external gear, voltage control for any of the oscillators or the filter, not to mention even connecting a normal node-based sequencer to run SoftPop and play melodies. So let's summarize and take a look at some of the pros and cons. On the pro side, SoftPop is a very original synth. It's all analog except for the sequencer, and it sounds great. And due to the default routings, it's very, very different. It's highly portable, very sturdy, and with the patch bay, infinitely extendable and flexible. You can reroute it in many ways and get infinitely creative. On the con side, the first thing that I would mention is its price. At $300 or $400 or euros, it's not cheap. And as I mentioned before, it would have benefited from a more normal VCA and envelope and more conveniently placed resonance control. But if you want a synth that would just behave normally, this one isn't for you. But all that said, if I look at its purpose, which is portable madness in a box, SoftPop is a very interesting travel companion that will keep a curious mind busy for quite some time. SoftPop isn't just a synth, it's a puzzle waiting to be explored. Okay, let's move on to the Gecho Loopsynth. This is an entirely different travel companion, powered by 3 AA batteries, and housed in a beautiful wooden box with calm and colorful LEDs. Gecho's Loopsynth is just what the doctor ordered after the psychedelic SoftPop party. A serene, meditative, pleasant friend to chill with. Loopsynth is all about physical interaction. It has 2 highly sensitive microphones and 4 infrared distance sensors, and it can also detect the presence of magnets too. Aside from the microphones, you have an audio input and you've got 2 outputs to share the audio with a friend. What runs Loopsynth is a digital sound engine, and while it can really do anything, it has dozens of algorithms with different takes at creating engaging and ambient soundscapes to be modulated with sounds coming in through the microphones and audio in, or gestures made in the air in proximity to these sensors. The effect type algorithms take incoming audio either through the microphones, which are very sensitive, or through the incoming line in, and apply effects like variable time echoes and interesting reverbs. Granular synthesis mode is another interesting feature of Loopsynth. Sensor 1 adds more layers, those are the red lights. Sensor 2, the orange lights, sample new tones. And yeah, it was able to pick up my humming. Despite quite a lot of noise in a public space, the microphones are rather sensitive. The 4 buttons here let you select programs and control various aspects of a program while it's running. For example, the delay time of the echo, whether the input used is the microphones or the line in, or to program in chord sequences. If I had to group the algorithms by type, roughly there are about 4 basic types. Variations of live effects like echoes, delays, and reverbs, granular synthesis samplers, tonal resonators that will take incoming sounds and then match them to melodies or chord sequences, and tonal soundscapes like winds, oceans, and storms. All of these result in an experience that's quite soothing and engaging and can suck you in for quite some time. I probably spent a good half hour humming into this beautiful box of lights at the top of the Willis Tower and was quite surprised that no one called security in all that time. One of the more interesting engines in Loopsynth is one where you program in chords and then have external audio resonate through them. So programming chords is quite straightforward. You set the number of chords you want in a sequence. I'll take 2 in this case. And then you just cycle through the chords. You can transpose them. Once you're happy, you can select the chord. And using sort of this shift double button combo, you can change the type of chord. And if you have a magnetic ring, you can literally pick off notes in the air. Once I created my 2 chord sequence, I can now hum into it or create any other sounds and have them resonate based on my chord sequence. Sensors S3 and S4 increase resonance and add an arpeggio based on my chords. So to summarize, Loopsynth is a truly unique box of lights, sensors, and sounds. It's a great standalone ambient soundscaping tool and also partners very well with other instruments as an effects box or granular sampler. On the cons side, the buttons and sensors are slightly too close to each other, which might be expected due to this size, but entering chords was a bit tough with my big fingers because it requires pressing more than one button at a time, so perhaps in a future version, these buttons could be spaced out a little bit more. Each of the 2 groups of IR sensors are also pretty close to each other on either side, which makes triggering them individually a bit of a challenge, though invites happy accidents using them together. Finally, there is no screen, and you need to type in a code number for each algorithm, so you'll need a cheat sheet with the algorithm numbers nearby. So those were my 2 odd travel companions. Since both have audio inputs, you can feed one into the other and vice versa. One is analog, another is digital, and both are quite unlike any other synth you may have seen. Both can be used standalone, but both also partner really well with other gear. Both make completely different sounds, and yet both can make sounds that sound like water. If you liked this video, please hit like. If you want to see more, click subscribe and ring the little YouTube bell. Supporting this channel on Patreon gets you a continuously updated book with electronic music ideas, tips, and tricks, and funds trips to places like this for more interesting videos. Stick around for a bit more. Thanks for watching.